Hello, friends. Welcome back to another emotional story filled with grief, secrets, betrayal, and difficult choices. Today, we enter the broken home of Ted and Marion, a married couple whose lives were destroyed after the tragic death of their two sons. While Marion sinks deeper into sorrow and Ted hides behind his work, an 18-year-old aspiring writer named Eddie arrives as a driver and assistant. But his innocent admiration soon turns into a dangerous relationship that Ted may have secretly planned for his own benefit. Behind every quiet conversation lies painful truth, and one final revelation will expose the real reason this family fell apart. Stay with us until the end, because the truth behind their tragedy will change everything. At the beginning of the story, we meet a man named Ted, a successful children's book author who also works as a painter. Ted lives with his wife, Marion, and their young daughter, Ruth. The walls of their home are covered with photographs of their two sons, both of whom are no longer alive. Several years earlier, the boys were killed in a terrible car accident. That single tragedy shattered Ted and Marion emotionally and changed the entire atmosphere inside their family. Marion was unable to recover from the loss and gradually slipped into a deep depression. She often cries while remembering her sons and spends most of her time alone in her bedroom. She barely speaks to anyone, and she has even begun keeping her distance from Ruth. Her conversations with Ted have almost completely stopped, making the damage to their marriage impossible to ignore. Ted handles the grief differently. Instead of confronting his pain, he buries himself in writing and painting, hoping that constant work will keep the memories away. Because neither parent is able to care for Ruth properly, they employ a babysitter to look after her. One day, Ted tells Marion that their relationship is no longer functioning and suggests that they live separately. Marion agrees. From then on, they alternate between the family home and a rented apartment in town. Ted stays at the house one day, Marion the next, allowing Ruth to continue receiving attention from both parents without being moved back and forth. A few days later, Ted speaks on the phone with an 18-year-old young man named Eddie. After their conversation, Ted decides to hire him as a live-in assistant and driver. Ted needs someone behind the wheel because his own license was suspended after he was caught driving while intoxicated. Eddie is expected to move into the house and begin working the following day. When that day arrives, Ted is busy, so he asks Marion to pick Eddie up. Eddie is surprised when Marion appears instead of Ted. Yet seeing her also creates an emotion he does not fully understand. He places his belongings in her car, and Marion drives him to Ted's home before leaving. Once inside, Eddie finally meets Ted. He greatly admires Ted's books and dreams of becoming an accomplished writer himself. For Eddie, living and working in the home of an author he respects feels like an extraordinary opportunity. While showing him around, Ted explains that he and Marion no longer live as husband and wife. They remain connected through Ruth, but they now spend most of their time apart. Eddie responds politely and says he is sorry to hear that. He is then introduced to Ruth's babysitter and begins learning how the household operates. Ted does more than write books at home. He also paints, often using a young woman as a figure model while he sketches her. One evening, after Marion visits Ruth, she gets into her car and leaves the house. Curious and increasingly drawn to her, Eddie follows. He watches her enter a movie theater, buys a ticket, and sits several rows behind her. Marion has no idea that he is quietly observing her throughout the film. When she later comes outside and notices him, she asks whether everything at the house is going well. Eddie jokes that he has been eating the same type of food for several days. Marion tells him that she will take him out for a proper dinner soon. That night, Eddie sits alone in his room and looks tenderly at a framed photograph of Marion. His fascination has clearly become personal. When Ted and Ruth unexpectedly enter, Eddie quickly puts the picture back and acts as though nothing happened. The next day, Marion visits the beach, and Eddie once again follows her from a distance. He stays hidden while watching her, afraid to reveal how strongly he has become attracted to her. Later, back at the house, Eddie finds one of Marion's intimate garments and holds it close, trying to feel connected to her. Marion suddenly walks in and catches him. Eddie is overwhelmed with embarrassment, But Marion does not become angry. Instead, she calls him closer and gently tells him that people his age often behave impulsively and that he should not hate himself for it. She then says that, at the very least, someone is still thinking about her. Eddie admits that since the first moment he saw her, he has been unable to stop thinking about her. Marion does not answer. She simply remains quiet, absorbing his confession. The following day, Eddie discovers that Marion has deliberately left an intimate garment on his bed. He understands the message and becomes excited. That evening, he dresses carefully and goes to dinner with her. They eat, talk, and enjoy an ease with each other that neither of them expected. Afterward, they return home. Over the next several days, they begin spending more and more time together. Whenever they speak, Eddie's full attention remains fixed on Marion, and she clearly notices it. Marion finds comfort in talking to him. Instead of hiding every painful memory, she begins opening up about her grief, loneliness, and broken marriage. Eddie listens sincerely and starts to understand the depth of her suffering. During one conversation, Marion learns that Eddie has never been physically involved with a woman. The moment changes the nature of their relationship. They become intimate, and from that point forward, a secret affair begins. Marion had felt emotionally abandoned for years, but she now sees Eddie as a temporary source of warmth and support. He is much younger than she is, yet his innocence reminds her of a life that existed before tragedy consumed her. Eddie is equally happy when he is with her, and as time passes, he becomes emotionally attached. He believes he has fallen in love. Marion's feelings are more complicated. To her, the relationship is not necessarily a future. It is an escape from unbearable sorrow. One day, Ted sees Marion laughing with Eddie, but he shows little concern. His marriage is already near collapse, and he prefers spending time with the model he paints. Later, while Marion and Eddie are together privately, Ruth unexpectedly sees them and begins screaming. Marion quickly calms her and sends her back to her room. The next day, Eddie is driving Ted somewhere when Ted reveals that he already knows about the affair. In fact, he has known enough to use it for his own advantage. Ted believes the marriage is ending, and he wants a divorce, but he does not want Marion to receive custody of Ruth. He intentionally allowed Eddie to grow close to her, hoping their relationship would provide evidence in court that Marion was unfaithful and irresponsible. Ted tells Eddie that when the divorce case begins, he must testify on Ted's behalf. Eddie is expected to admit the affair and describe Marion as an unfit mother, so the judge will award Ruth's custody to Ted. His apparent indifference is therefore not emotional maturity. It is strategy. Eddie realizes that the man he admired is capable of manipulating everyone around him, including his own wife, his employee, and his daughter. This discovery changes Eddie's view of Ted completely. The job that once seemed like a dream now feels morally dangerous, and Eddie begins to understand that he has been invited into the home partly because Ted believed his youth would make him easy to control. Eddie is disturbed by the plan and tells Marion what Ted has said. He then asks why she continues to remain connected to her husband. Marion explains that Ted can be a capable father and takes care of practical matters, but she dislikes the way he uses women in his artwork. She also reveals that Ted once painted her without clothing when their relationship was different. On another night, Eddie asks Marion how her 2 sons died. The question immediately brings the memories back, and Marion breaks down in tears. Not long afterward, Eddie shows Ruth an old photograph of Marion as a young woman. Ruth insists on taking the framed picture with her, and Eddie finally allows it. The next day, the frame slips from Ruth's hands and shatters. A piece of glass cuts her finger, so Eddie and Marion rush her to the hospital, where the wound is closed with stitches. When Ted learns what happened, he angrily scolds Eddie outside the hospital. That night, Ruth wakes from a nightmare and cannot stop crying. Ted tries to comfort her, but nothing he says works. Marion enters, holds Ruth, and calms her almost immediately. Watching them together forces Ted to recognize something he has tried to ignore. Even if he wins the divorce and receives full custody, he cannot replace the love Ruth receives from her mother. The following day, Marion and Eddie are sharing another private moment when Marion suddenly begins to cry. She tells him that their relationship must end because she has decided to leave everything behind and disappear from the house permanently. That same afternoon, Ted asks Eddie to return a painting to the model's home because he has grown tired of seeing her. When Eddie delivers it, the model becomes furious. She tells him that Ted must come to see her on Friday and that she will be waiting. Eddie returns home and reports the message first to Ted and then to Marion. Marion immediately forms a plan. She tells Eddie to drive Ted to the model's house on Friday, leave him there, and bring the car straight back. Without transportation, Ted will need additional time to return home. Marion intends to use that delay to collect every photograph of her dead sons and leave forever. She has decided not to take Ruth because she believes her grief has damaged her too deeply for her to be a good mother. Friday arrives, and Eddie drives Ted to the model's home exactly as instructed. He drops him off and quickly leaves with the car. Inside, the model is enraged. She has torn apart the paintings Ted sent her and begins chasing him through the property. When she cannot catch him on foot, she gets into a car and attempts to run him down. Her assistant helps Ted escape, allowing him to avoid being struck. The model jumps out and continues pursuing him. Meanwhile, Marion sends Ruth with Eddie to the doctor so the stitches can be removed from the girl's finger. She plans to be gone before they return that evening. She says nothing to Ruth because she knows her daughter would beg her to stay. After the medical appointment, Eddie takes Ruth to collect the repaired picture frame. He hopes the restored photograph will comfort her when she discovers that Marion is gone. At the same time, Ted escapes into a bookstore owned by a friend. There he meets two sisters who are enthusiastic admirers of his work. Ted asks whether they can drive him home. They agree, but first take him to their own house, where he changes his clothes. Ted then compliments the sisters and their mother, telling all three women that they are beautiful and that he would like to paint them. Flattered and excited, they agree, and the group drives toward Ted's home together. When Ted arrives, he sees Marion leaving. The two look at each other, but neither speaks. Their silence makes it clear that the marriage has finally ended. Marion drives away. Soon afterward, Eddie returns with Ruth. Furious that Eddie abandoned him at the model's house, Ted slaps him. Eddie responds by punching Ted in the nose, following Marion's earlier advice that a sudden blow would stop him. Eddie then explains that Marion has left for good and has taken every photograph of their sons with her. Ted now has no pictures of the boys remaining in the house. Enraged and devastated, he fires Eddie and orders him to leave as soon as possible. After Marion's departure, caring for Ruth becomes increasingly difficult. The babysitter quits the very next day, leaving Ted overwhelmed. That night, Ted finally tells Eddie the full truth about the accident that killed his sons. One winter evening, Ted and Marion had attended a party with the boys. On the drive home, Ted and Marion sat in the front while their sons were in the back seat. Ted had failed to clear the ice from the car's rear lights and turn signals. Because the vehicle was difficult to see from behind, a truck struck them, killing both children. Ted and Marion later had Ruth, hoping a new child might help them survive the grief, but her birth could not repair what had been destroyed. Marion had eventually understood that Ted was using Eddie in the affair as part of a custody strategy. She was already deeply unhappy and privately blamed Ted for the death of their sons. That is why she chose to leave him and disappear. The next day, Eddie also departs for good. Soon afterward, the model's former driver arrives at Ted's house. The model has fired him, so Ted offers him a new position as his driver and assistant. Ted also hires the man's wife to help care for Ruth. The couple settles into their new jobs, bringing some order back into the home, and the story comes to an end. Thank you so much for staying with this video until the very end. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, please like the video, share it with someone who loves movie stories, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next upload. We will be back soon with another story. Until then, take care, stay safe, and goodbye.